Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Bobby Pominville. I'm your reporter on the arts. One of my favorite parts is the language arts. So today I have an author here I've known for several years. I'd like to welcome Gary Porter to the show.
Thank you, Bobby, for inviting me to be here.
And it's actually our second time.
It is.
Because I interviewed you when you wrote the book about Duffy, The Tale of a Terrier, and I loved that book. I'm a dog person too. But this time you're writing about your Midwestern boyhood. And I'm just so into this because it really correlates with a lot of my childhood. But I should give them a little bit of a background because I do know you're in your other part of life, you're an accountant.
I was an accounting professor pretty much my entire career.
Yes, and was that at Drake or was that somewhere else?
My undergraduate degree is Drake,
right.
But I taught at a number of universities around the country.
Oh.
The longest stretch was at Loyola in Chicago. I was there for 16 years, and prior to retiring from full-time teaching, what brought us to the Twin Cities is I taught at St. Thomas, just over in St. Paul.
I never knew that.
Yes, I did. Yep.
That is wonderful, and I admire you so much for that. And now you have your doctorate in accounting?
I do, yes. My entire academic training is in business and in accounting, so
wow.
It's kind of a switch now.
And then this must be kind of your sideline thing, to sit down and write?
Yeah, it started with textbooks. My early writing was with accounting textbooks through 10 editions, and more recently with the Duffy book, I turned to creative writing, and I found that just something I really enjoy and am passionate about. So it started with the Duffy book, and now the collection of essays about growing up in a small Midwestern town.
Right. So this is your second book. It's called Town Kid. I'm really identifying with this book, Gary. It's going to be fun to talk to you. It was published in 2018, and I found the book to be engaging and very reflective of my memories growing up in the Midwest in Hatton, North Dakota. And if I went to a bookstore or whatever, it's a book I would choose to read.
Well, thank you.
Just because I like the subject, and I know you write very interesting books, because I've already read your first one too. So how did the book come to fruition?
Well, it really came after the Duffy book, as I said, and I can recall when I came in to talk to you about the Duffy book, I made mention of beginning to write some essays about growing up in Greenfield, Iowa. And really the launch for this project, as I mentioned, was a contest in River Falls with the community library there, one book reads, where everyone would read the same book. And that was John Hassler, a very well-known Minnesota author, who one of his books was Grand Opening. And that book was about a group of people, particularly one family, that moved from the Twin Cities area to a small town to open a grocery store. And so that was the River Falls One Book Reads. Well, my wife Melissa, who is very good about reminding me to keep going on my writing, said, you know, this was made for you. This essay contest was right down your alley. So I wrote an essay, which is in the book, and I'd like to read some from that, called Saturday.
I want you to, when we get there.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's an essay called Saturday on the Town Square. I was fortunate that ended up being selected the winner in the essay contest, and that was really the springboard, if you will, for putting this collection of essays together.
So you started with the one.
I did.
And you won the contest.
Yeah, and it just, it gave me some motivation and some confidence about essay writing. What I had done, Bobby, prior to that, had taken some classes at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, and two of those that I took particularly were essentially about writing about your hometown. Reflections on what it was like and we all came from different sizes and places of hometowns, but that helped a lot to get things going. And then I just started, kind of crafting essays. A lot of it was going back to my hometown in Iowa and doing research in the archives of the old newspapers there. And I can tell you more about our weekly newspaper too as we go along.
I want to talk about that because I was reading the book last night, finished it after Game of Thrones. And of course I had to get away from the war and all that. But anyway, during the night I had a dream. And it was like I was in Greenfield, but it was like Hatton, North Dakota.
Is that right?
And I was even in my grandma's house.
Oh my gosh.
So whatever you wrote, just tweaked that up in me, and I was having the memories.
Oh, that's terrific.
It was wonderful, and that's not the only thing. As we go through this interview, I have to share some other things with you because this book really brought out some memories in me.
You know, that's terrific.
And that's what you want to do.
Well, that's what you want to do. And,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So you've got the book, the way I like it so much, you've got it divided into 3 parts. And the first part is the longest, I believe, and it's living. So I wondered if you would like to share one of your favorite paragraphs from that part?
Sure.
Or comments about a favorite part?
Yeah, I mean, I thought if it's appropriate, I have the essay Saturday on the Town Square.
Yes,
which
I do
is,
want to hear
it's a
that.
relatively short one.
Yes, please.
It was intentionally that way because of the parameters of the essay contest.
Yes.
So, and I should mention as we go along, Bobby, each of these essays is accompanied by an old black and white photo.
Yes, and I love the photos.
Well, you know, they just help paint the picture in a black and white way, that is. And those photos predominantly, not all of them, but most of them were taken from what's called the Sidey Collection. And this is actually a book that was put together of those old photos of the Sidey family. And just as a little bit of background, the Sideys ran the Adair County Free Press for, 4 or 5 generations going back into the 1800s. Hugh and Ed were brothers, and they were essentially a generation before me. And Ed stayed back home and ran the Adair County Free Press till the time he passed away. His brother Hugh went to Washington, D.C., and he was pretty much the Time magazine's presidential journalist. He followed the presidents around the world, all the way from Eisenhower to George W. Bush. He was there at the White House swimming pool with JFK. He was traveling on Air Force One with all of them, Nixon, Eisenhower, Reagan.
So impressive.
Yeah, well, he was the one who went off to Washington, D.C. He always came back to Greenfield. He loved Greenfield. He felt very much like I did. And I have to say, Hugh Sidey was one of my inspirations for writing the book. We never had a chance to meet on our home ground in Greenfield, but both Melissa and I, at various professional meetings we had a chance to meet him because he was the luncheon speaker. And so there's a very special connection with the Sideys and with that collection of old photos. Ed's widow has kept the black and white photos as a digital collection. And so we went through, a lot of my research was going through those old photos and trying to pick those that best captured an essay that I was writing. So this particular essay, Saturday on the Town Square, the old black and white photo that goes with that is just that. It's the northwest corner of the town square in Greenfield, Iowa. If I could give just a real quick background on Greenfield.
Yes, I would really enjoy that, and I know the audience would too.
Well, it's the county seat of Adair County. I always say we're the next county over from Madison County, where they had those famous bridges.
Oh, yes.
That's Madison County. To the west is Adair County. I was always very proud of the fact that Adair County is the #1 county in the state of Iowa. Now, that's not by population or anything other than the fact that back in the day, the counties in Iowa, their license plates were numbered numerically according to the alphabet. So what was the #1 county in the state? A-D-A-I-R, Adair County. And so we're the county seat. Greenfield, a little bit bigger than your hometown, but Greenfield has stayed at about 2,000 as a county seat. It was 2,000 back when I was growing up there, and it's still about that size today. And it, just to place it geographically, it's about an hour southwest of Des Moines, the capital city in Iowa.
Oh yeah, and I've been through Iowa on the freeway, so
Yeah.
I'm sort of picturing a little bit where it is.
Yeah, and you know, one of the, I think sometimes misconceptions, everything's flat. Well, not that part of the state. We're coming off of the Missouri River there.
Yeah.
It's rolling hills. It's a very
Yes.
rolling hill.
It's quite beautiful,
It is.
actually.
It is. So Town Square, if I could read from that.
Yes, please do.
And each of these essays, by the way, starts off with an epigraph, which essentially is just a little lead-in to kind of set the stage. Many of those lead-ins are from the Adair County Free Press that the Sidey family ran all those years. This particular lead to Town Square is from what's on our website for greenfieldiowa.com from its history, but I want to read that to set the stage. Town Night on the Square offered a variety of businesses to frequent. A movie to see, a good meal at a small town cafe, and a snow cone or popcorn from Eddie's Super Popcorn Stand. So here's this essay. 50 years later, no need for a GPS. I just close my eyes and I'm back on the old town square. Up the alley to peek in the window of the pool hall. Old men in bib overalls hunch over a snooker table, their leathery chins dripping tobacco juice. I can taste a mellow Mountain Dew from the pop machine, but I resist the temptation to step inside. That's my mother's edict. The pool hall is off limits to a kid of 13. Not because they sell liquor, they don't, though I often wonder why the old men occasionally disappear into the back room. It's the language in the pool hall, even stronger than the fragrance of fresh manure on the farmer's boots. The square's beginning to fill with pickups, each sporting a thick layer of dust, like frosting on a cake, compliments of the gravel washboards those farmers drive to town. It's a Saturday, the day they come to town to shop. Any official business will have to wait for another day. That takes place at the county courthouse in the middle of the square. Weekdays, Uncle Max would welcome me in to explore his massive steel vault. The dusty leather-bound books there tell the story of our history as it pertains to the good, the bad, and the ugly. That is, marriages, births, deaths, and divorces. I stop in to gaze in the window display at Croix clothing. The new Converse high tops have arrived. Those are the shoes that will earn me my first letter. The letter I'll proudly wear on one of those shiny black and gold jackets hanging in the window. I glance up at the marquee above the Grand Theater to see what's playing this Saturday night. A blob engulfing an entire town? Elvis strumming a guitar at a Hawaiian luau? Or Moses parting the Red Sea? I'll surely be back tonight, but now I got to hurry along. Can't be late for my first day at the grocery store. I reach in my pocket for my clip-on tie. Along with a short-sleeved white shirt and black slacks, they make up the uniform of an official stock shelfer and bag sacker. So far, my jobs have been of the neighborhood variety, shoveling walks, mowing lawns, delivering the newspaper. This is a major step up, though, 90 cents an hour and a clip-on tie. If I had more time, I'd stop in the Carnegie Library. Who knows what would wait for me there? I might hear the howling of a wolf on the Yukon, ride along with Huck and Jim down the Mississippi, or maybe even help fight back the Germans on the Rhine River. But now I've just enough time to peep through the smoke-stained glass of the beer joint in the back of the grocery store. A townie gives me a smug look as he hustles out with a six-pack under his arm, lighting a Camel with his free hand. My senses come alive as I gaze inside. The bright blue neon of the jovial Ham's Bear logo lit up over the bar. The cold, crisp taste, or so I suspect, of a frothy draft from the land of sky blue waters. Warm, salted beer nuts in a jar on the counter. And as the screen door opens for another early morning disciple, the sweet melody of I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles on the jukebox. For now, I hustle into the grocery store treated to the aroma of fresh fruit and apple fritters. I clip on my tie, put on an apron, and begin a Saturday on the town square.
That is so well written.
Thank you.
And every part of it, I could just see what you're doing. And it was like that in my town too, where that was a big no-no. Our bar was called the Dugout.
The Dugout,
And
very
I went down the stairs. But when I was a senior cheerleader in my black and gold sweater.
You were black and gold, we were too.
Didn't I tell you? We have commonalities here.
Yes.
And we decided we'd run through, it was homecoming, we'd run through the bar. So we did. And I'll never forget the smell. And
there's a very distinct smell.
very dark, almost like smoky atmosphere in there. And I knew my mother would be very upset that I had even done that, even though I was with other girls, whatever. But anyway, that just really took me back.
Well, I can see why it would. And there's something I wanted to mention about that photo. And again, you see it in the book, starting each of the essays. That particular shot, I chose that because the building to the far left in that photo is the actual grocery store where I put on my clip-on tie and bag groceries. So it's a very special photo. Just to the right of that grocery store in the picture, there's Piper's Five and Dime, and every little town had, whether you want to call them a variety store or a five and dime store. And then next to that was the Grand Theater. And I mentioned the Grand Theater because to this day, it's one of the few businesses in the very same location doing the same thing that it did back in the 1960s.
That's amazing.
Well, an amazing thing too, Bobby, about that is that beauty of digital photography. I could zoom in on the marquee in that picture of the old Grand Theater.
Oh, yeah.
And I could see that what was playing was a movie with Dean Martin and Shirley MacLaine, all in a night's work from 1961.
Oh, yes.
And so I thought about that, and when I've read the book and discussed it with people, one of the things that always comes to my mind is that if you fast forward 8 years to 1969, that's when cold turkey came to town.
Oh, yeah.
And that, can I talk just briefly about cold turkey?
Yes, please go there.
Because that is
That's a big deal.
Well, it's a big deal, and we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of cold turkey. And if you're, if those watching this program aren't familiar, cold turkey was Norman Lear's creation just before he did All in the Family.
Oh,
he
my.
scoured the Midwest trying to find the perfect little idyllic town to film this movie. In very short order, the premise of the movie is that a tobacco company has decided they would give $25 million prize if an entire town would stop smoking, go cold turkey. And so the ad executive, played by Bob Newhart, said, this will be easy enough. No entire town can do that. We won't give up the money, but we'll get all this great publicity. So Bob Newhart plays the ad executive. Dick Van Dyke is the local preacher in town who gets behind the movement.
He's playing a preacher in this one?
He plays the preacher. And so that movie, 1969, 8 years after that marquee, was filmed primarily with a few places elsewhere, but primarily in Greenfield, Iowa, on the town square. And so
that's really impressive.
It is. It's a real, important part of the history of Greenfield. And so now we're coming up on
such excitement for a small town to get all that recognition.
It was. People have asked how did that
town.
And how did the townsfolk react? I think they never really seemed starstruck or thought, gee. We have these Hollywood people in our midst. They took it in stride. They were very welcoming and really enjoyed the entire process. So one of the essays later on in the book is called Greenfield Goes Cold Turkey. And there's a great black and white photo that starts that one off that shows Norman Lear sitting there as the director on kind of a
that picture is very precious.
Yeah, it is.
I had to look twice at Dick Van Dyke. I
was
had
very
never
young,
seen him
wasn't
that
he?
young.
That's right. He was just a young man then.
No, that was a really good picture. And all the pictures in the book are so impressive, so well done. Well, now I get to read my favorite part from Living. And the way you wrote this, it just totally draws me in. Is my hometown memorable in any sense of the word? I will tell you the one remarkable trait of this town, named after a patch of grass. It still has a magnetic pull on someone who has lived away from it for multiples of the number of years he lived in it. I'm feeling this way too about mine. I have known many towns since then, lived in some big cities, lived in some suburbs, but none hold the force this little town still does all these years later. Like a robin returning in the springtime, I go back in my mind to the little town on the prairie to await those green fields of summer. That last part, it just takes me right back to North Dakota.
Yeah, I think what we found since the book has been out, Bobby, is that it really, when I read something, either as you just did or an entire essay or parts of one, people immediately relate to their own place. Exactly. We always say how it's more that time period. It's partly place, but it's also the time period. Yes. My wife, Melissa, grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. So, you don't think, you think, well, where was there any commonality there? Well, she had a neighborhood. And she had these neighborhood kids that she played with and has stayed in touch with to this day. And it's that group you really bonded with when you were a kid, and particularly during this time period of the 50s and 60s.
Definitely. Definitely. That was really one of my favorite parts. And there are many favorite parts, but I'm holding myself back now. On part 2, I'm letting you share.
Okay.
And my favorite part from this section is Slowpoke in the Davenport. That touched me. What a beautiful memory and a tribute to your mother. Will you share your thoughts about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And you're right, that really was written, that essay was written as a tribute to my mother. This is probably as a good place as any to bring up that the book has what ended up being 3 sections to it.
Yes.
The living section, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, which does have a majority of the essays. But then I thought, there's this interlude, there's the leaving part. And to me, leaving doesn't happen in one day. It doesn't happen over a year's time. Frankly, maybe it never totally happens that we leave in our hearts our hometown. But there was a time period when I went off to Colorado to school, and fortunately that's where Melissa and I met in school.
That's very
And
nice.
It was a process of a few years of going to school, grad school in Colorado, leading up to being an accounting professor, and then going off eventually to California, where we first both started our careers. So again, the leaving to me was this period of years over which I was still really clinging to Greenfield and that growing up period like we all went through, but then going through a process of transitioning. So one of the essays in there, in that leaving section, is called Slowpoke and the Davenport. And I don't know, in North Dakota, was your family couch or sofa called a Davenport?
Oh, yes,
Was
always.
it? I think, kind of like pop and soda.
Yes, the wording in the book just fits my era, too.
I think part of it is Midwest and
I think so.
Nomenclature that we use for
You
things.
talk about pop.
Pop versus soda.
Never said soda.
That's
When
right.
Somebody said that you wanted a soda. What is that?
Yeah, pocket
We had that little problem when I brought, I guess, my roommates home from college and stuff, because it was like they had a little different language.
Yeah, it is. It's all the types of words that you use for certain things.
Yeah.
Well, Davenport was the family sofa that sat in the living room.
Yes.
And for the entire time I was growing up, there was this picture Slowpoke that hung over the Davenport. Right. And I won't give away everything that's in that essay, but what really the reason that is such a special essay and hopefully why it comes across the way it does is because my mother was a real horsewoman. She grew up, rode her pony literally, you know, to the one-room schoolhouse.
Oh, my.
And she was a country girl growing up and
Yes.
eventually moved into Greenfield. But she loved horses, and slowpoke was, you'll see it in the black and white photo in the book. It's a picture, we say it's almost like the Marlboro Man on his horse looking back at a little colt who is obviously the slowpoke. Well, that hung over the sofa in our family living room. I'm sorry, yeah, over the sofa, the Davenport. And it always had a special place. Well, when my father, after my mother passed away at much too young of an age, when he was selling the house, it was out in the yard for the yard sale.
Yes.
And I essentially rescued it, brought it home, and I said, I'll kind of stop there because there's some really interesting parts
Oh, yes.
to that essay.
The story continues.
The story continues, and
it's
the
a
other
good
thing I'll
one.
mention is to this day that painting hangs in my office at home. So
Right. Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts. Very touching. So that was part 2, leaving.
yes,
Then part 3 is longing.
yeah,
And I have a favorite part there too, and then I'm going to let you share.
okay,
So anyway, I'm using all your bookmarks here. This is so well written, Gary. Longing for times past is fraught with danger, warning signs all around. Things change. Favorite uptown stores shutter their windows. Some friends gray, others go bald. Loved ones die, and there are more names recognizable on the gravestones in the cemetery on the edge of town than on the buildings up on the square. And now there is talk of consolidating counties. No, nothing seems to stay the same except the march of time. You know, when I was reading in the Hatton Free Press,
uh-huh,
that too we share.
yeah, you had a free press.
And they have the yesteryears column.
Yes,
And there was a big fight over the 2 towns in North Dakota that wanted the county seat.
we had the fight as
And
well.
I went, it was in Iowa too.
Yes, it was.
And I've read a few little excerpts from the paper there. It was really a serious fight.
Yes,
I think it came to blows
yes.
up in North Dakota.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's interesting. Every small town paper, I think, has those looks back where they reprint articles. Ours was 30 years ago, 60 years ago, 90 years ago.
That's kind of what we have.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, a lot of my research, by the way, took place back in Greenfield by going through the old newspapers that they've done a great job of preserving in the library. They're in our library now.
Yes.
And being very, very careful about turning the pages, I would go through those and try and just find news articles, not only to help me think about what I wanted to write about, but also as those epigraphs, those lead-ins to each of the essays. But longing is that last section.
That is a great final chapter.
Well, the part that you read is accompanied by an old black and white photograph that happens to be of the fairgrounds. And I wanted to mention the fairgrounds because then one of the essays in there, and this again ties in with the feelings I had about my mother, the horsewoman, because she was the secretary of the county fair. And so summers were, much of the time my growing up years in the summer was spent out at the fairgrounds getting ready for the county fair, painting buildings, mowing and so forth, and then the excitement of the county fair itself. So, you know, that was a very special one to write. And again, it's a reflection of well, and my dad was out there a lot as well. My mother said was the real horsewoman, but my dad was always right by the side helping. He at one time showed a pony himself. And then there's also an essay in there that's a real reflection of my recollections of him because he was a truck driver. And so I used to ride with him on the truck into the big city, into Des Moines. And so there's a essay in there that's a reflection of the time spent with him in the big truck.
That's a very neat part too. So anyway, I didn't give you a chance to say too much about that, but we've got to save some of it for the reader to
That's
discover
right.
too.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I found the whole thing very engaging. I do read quite a few books off and on during the years here, and this one really drew me in. So
Well, I really appreciate
I think people are going to love it. And I'm sure you've had it out for a year now, right?
Yes, we the book came out back at the end of September, and we talked earlier about the inspiration truly being that generation that's primarily gone now, but we still all remember, and kind of writing it to keep their memory alive.
Great memories.
And you know, writing it, in my mind, it's a tribute to that prior generation, but then it's written almost as a gift for the younger generation to let them know what those times were like back then. But
That's
yeah,
great.
the book came out in late September. Part of the motivation, honestly, was my class reunion. I had a significant class reunion coming up at the end of September. It doesn't take much mathematically to figure out that it was my 50th, because I graduated in 1968.
And you got to share some.
And I got to share it. My wife, earlier on in the year, I was getting closer, and she kept reminding me, said, you know, you want to get this done with that class reunion coming up. And it did get literally hot off the press in time for that reunion. So
wonderful.
It was perfect timing to be able to share with not only my classmates, but all of the people around my town. The actual launch of the book, Bobby, was in the old Opera House.
And so
that's
so neat.
It was a thrill to be there, right on the town square, and kind of recreate those times. Said with not only my classmates, but with so many members of my family and friends that were there. So it was a special time.
Great
But yeah,
time.
since then we've done all sorts of events in the 6-7 months since then. Bookstores, libraries, the local launch so far.
Yes, that's what I'm going to ask you next.
Yeah,
so let's go into that.
Well, we had one at the River Falls Library back in the fall, at that community library down there. Great turnout. So we've done that. We've done book clubs. So we were part of what was called the Des Moines Book Festival, which was a great opportunity to showcase the book to people in my home state. We even did something back in January. I was part of a murder mystery dinner. And I got to read.
Fun.
If you've ever done one of those, they're really
I like murder mysteries too.
Yeah. So we did that, but yeah, looking ahead, we've got a lot of events coming up down the road. Those are on our Facebook page. Melissa maintains a Facebook page. It's an easy one. It's facebook.com/thetownkid, all one word, the town kid. And so you can go on there and find out where we're going to be.
Thank you. That's very nice for the audience.
Yeah, it is. I'll mention a couple of the events coming up.
Yes, please do.
With local appeal. It's all kind of in that first week in June that we're really going to be ramping things up here. There's a program called Going Coastal that Mike Sly, a good friend and neighbor, has been putting on and producing. It's like a Prairie Home Companion, his version of it. And if any of the people watching are familiar with the Wide Spot in Stockholm, it's a local theater in Stockholm, Wisconsin.
Oh, yes.
And I'm going to be a guest author on that program, Going Coastal, actually 2 nights. On Saturday night, June 1st, we're going to be in Menominee at the Mabel Tainer Theater there.
Yes, I've been there.
That's kind of a special performance that the Going Coastal group is doing there. And then the following night, on Sunday night, June 2nd, we will be at their home base in Stockholm, Wisconsin. So it'd be great that anyone that can come, and I'll be talking with Mike Sly and interviewed much like we are, and then reading a little bit from the book there. By the following week, June 4th, we're going to be right down the street here in Hudson at the library, the Hudson Public Library, on June 4th at 6:30. So we'll be doing those, but beyond that, Rotaries, book clubs, and then the other one I want to mention in June that's going to be a special event is the annual dinner of the St. Croix Valley Foundation. And
Oh,
so,
my word.
yes, they've asked me to, I'm very honored. They asked a while back to be the guest speaker there and talk about the book and read from it that evening for their donors. So that'll be a special
I have so much
event.
admiration for that foundation.
It's a great organization.
It is, really. I'm on the music education reading committee
Great.
for that foundation. So, and I've worked with them for years, and it's just such a wonderful thing for our community to have.
It really is. There's so many organizations that are in this area. The FIPS is another one of those.
Oh, yeah, we're very lucky.
Yes.
Really are. And I enjoyed reading the little comments by John Potter.
Yes.
That was really fun, too.
John was very gracious in his comments. I should mention, because it goes back to the time of the Duffy book, I've done a lot of my writing at the FIPS. I find inspiration there, whether it's gazing out those windows at the beautiful river,
Yes.
or looking at the artwork on the walls. But I've drawn a lot of
totally
inspiration
understand
there.
that.
And so it's been a special place.
Good.
And, I said John wrote a nice testimonial. We've had others that are mentioned on the back of the book.
Yes, oh, so many people, and I really enjoyed so many of those.
Well, and I'm sure you're familiar with Jerry Apps, who has been a very well-known Wisconsin writer. He was like myself, although not in accounting.
I didn't know that name before I read it.
Jerry Apps was a longtime professor at UW-Madison, and he was kind of, I like to think, the equivalent of me as the town kid. He was a country boy, and he has written at long length numerous books about growing up in a rural setting, not unlike mine, but me, the town kid. Well, he was very gracious in his comments about the book and was complimentary.
Very nice.
So.
Well, can you also tell us now, where can our audience find the book?
Yes, thank you for asking. The book is available at the Phipps Center right down the street here in their gift shop.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, just like Duffy, we have copies of the Town Kid book there. Kind of just each direction here, not far from where we're sitting. It's not only at the Phipps, but it's at Chapter 2 books.
Yes, and they've been very kind to you too.
They really have.
And I love that we have that bookstore.
It's really fortunate to have an independent bookstore that you walk in there, you pick out a book, you sit down on the sofa and sit and read and just it's a comfortable place, and they've been a good supporter of both books, Duffy and Town Kid. So those locally, as well as Valley Bookseller in Stillwater, has copies of Town Kid across the river and up the way. The local store over in Eau Claire, if any of those watching the program are more in Menominee, Eau Claire area, the local store. And then in our library system, of course, in the Moore system, there's copies available at a number of the libraries in the Moore system. So you can find the book there as well. One of the places, Bobby, that in case anyone listening, watching, ever goes down I-35, and I just want to mention this because it's kind of a cute story. There's what's called the Iowa Welcome Center that's just across from the Minnesota line into Iowa. And they have a gift shop in that, it's a rest stop, but then a welcome center for the state of Iowa. And their gift shop in there is called the Barn Boutique. And a few weeks back, we took some books in there. They said, sure, this looks like something that those coming into the gift shop would would appreciate. So we've already had to resupply them.
Good.
So it's going
Oh,
well
that's
there.
perfect.
So those are the places to find the hard copies. Also, of course, it's available both at Amazon.com and
Right.
BarnesandNoble.com.
Okay. Well, you've got a
as well.
lot of places there.
Yeah, a lot of places to
Wonderful.
find it. So
And I think a lot of people listening possibly are certainly near one or two or three of those.
I think they should be.
And I think that's a perfect way to find the book. Wow. Well, Gary, thank you so much for coming today.
Well, thank you for
I have
having me.
enjoyed this interview so much as I enjoyed the book.
Well, I think in talking with you here, I found out how much we had in common in terms
Yes.
of these small
Oh,
towns.
really?
And,
Quite a lot.
Well, I did not know you were the black and gold. We were the
Nope.
tigers, so I don't know.
I know it. That was, I still have that sweater. I think I should really get rid of it pretty soon, don't you? But no, it was always black and gold. Then when I got to St. Olaf, it was black and gold again.
Oh, it was meant to be.
So I never got out
Never
of
had
those
to
colors.
change colors.
So, but anyway, that's another thing. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm so inspired by this. Such great memories. And I'm going to be talking to my sister very soon and sharing it too.
Well, thank you.
I
and
want her to read it.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you for coming today. And I want to thank the audience for watching. I hope you'll pursue getting this book, Town Kid. It's excellent, and I know you'll enjoy it. Or visit one of those places where it's for sale in many different bookstores. And I know people are good on Amazon too. So thank you again for watching today.